Hello, everybody. It is Friday, March 14th, 2025. The issue of the American government and American government workers continue to dominate the news, all sorts of news about dismissals of government employees, lots of legal cases, employees suing the government. Lots of images, of course, of Elon Musk with his chain store, taking great delight, shameful delight, in my opinion, in cutting government. And we're increasingly seeing the faces of government workers. Perhaps some Americans aren't as familiar in this Rolling Stone piece, at least. We see the backs of their heads demonstrating against all these job cuts, which, of course, begs the question, who exactly is government? Who are the kind of people who work in government, and why do we need them? And there's a timely new book out by Michael Lewis, the timeliest, I guess, of authors, who has put together a fascinating new collection of essays. Who is government? The Untold Story of Public Service. It includes contributions from Lewis, of course, John Lancaster, Dave Eggers, who's been on the show, and my guest today, Sarah Vowell, who is based in Montana, Bozeman, and has a fascinating piece in the new book, which was serialized in the Washington Post. So, Sarah, congratulations on the new book. It's very timely, isn't it?
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, it really turned out to be. I got this assignment about a year and a half ago, and the assignment was go find someone in the government to write about. That was the assignment. And it came from, I think it comes out of Michael Lewis's work on his book, The Fifth Risk, which was about various federal agencies and government workers. And, I read that book, and you're reading it.
Yeah, it came out in 2018. I mean, it's the best book, in my view, about Trump 1.0, about Trump's desecration of certain government agencies, lack of respect. So, of course, this book, in a sense, is appropriate introduction.
It started it was about how they weren't, they were being a little loosey-goosey with the transition. And he went into some of these government agencies just to find out what they were up to, and found all of these, characters and patriots. And I mean, the book, I don't know if this sells it, but the hero of the book is the Department of Agriculture, really, which, does so much around the country and, keeps rural America alive, basically. So after writing that book, he and David Shipley from the Washington Post opinion page cooked up this project to send a few of us writers into the government to find more of these people and agencies to write about. And I wrote about a woman at the National Archives.
Yeah, and so Lewis wrote about the Department of Labor. Your piece is called, at least in the Washington Post, The Equalizer. So tell us about why you chose to write about this woman. Who exactly is she?
Well, when I was looking for someone to write about, I had a few criteria, and one of them was I wanted my subject to be a graduate of an American public university. I'm a graduate of an American public university, Montana State. It's about a 10-minute walk from where I'm sitting. And there was something during the pandemic where, I noticed a lot of the governors and other public servants who are really stepping into the breach of figuring out how to survive the pandemic when the federal government was, lacking. So many of them, especially the governors, graduated from public universities, and President, well, he was then a candidate. Biden was running, and he is a graduate of a public university too. So I've just been thinking about how the graduates of those universities are kind of tailor-made for public service, just because, they're public institutions. And they're also, along with the United States military, sort of the only public they're the only institutions in the country where a bunch of random adults are thrown together and made to coexist and talk to each other, which is a bit of a problem we have in this country these days of, the ability to talk to people you have nothing in common with. And so I found this woman, Pamela Wright. She is a graduate of the University of Montana, which is the rival school to my college, actually. I wasn't looking for a Montanan, but I found her. And she just retired in December, but she was the the innovation officer at the National Archives. And her job, which she kind of created for herself in a way, was sharing the records of the National Archives with the American public online. And so her brief includes digitization of records. The National Archives has 13 billion records, maybe more now. That was, I guess, in the fall when I got that number. And she and her people have so far about 300 million records have been digitized. And part of the story is how they do that. The programs that she created, especially volunteer programs to use citizen archivists to help digitize the records. And she comes from Conrad, Montana, a ranch outside of Conrad, Montana, which is this little tiny town in north central Montana. And I think her background completely informs how she did her job, which was trying to share as many of these records with far-flung Americans, because so many of the records are still in DC or Maryland, or there are a few regional records at some of the regional archives. But really digitizing these records is the only fair, equal way to get access to them if you live in Alaska or New Mexico or wherever. And so I think the fact that she comes from this place that's so far from DC really informed how she did her job and how she thought of of the public she was serving.
The book comes with a quote from JFK. It's the founding inscription in the book. "Let the public service be a proud and lively career, and let every man and woman who works in any area of our national government at any level be able to say with pride and with honor in future years, I served the United States government in that hour of our nation's need." That sort of JFK-style heroism of public service, of course, is one strand in thinking about government. Does that make up your essay about Pamela Wright? Is she heroic, or is she just simply doing a job?
She would not think of herself as heroic, but she is. That quote, it seems so quaint now, maybe we could have started maybe a more applicable quote in terms of, how the country thinks of these public servants as what President Reagan said. I think I don't know if this is the exact quote, something
the
like
9-word quote.
The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And so there has been a bit of a shift, I think, in thinking about that over the last however long that's been, 70 years. But she was very difficult to write about. Like so many of these people in the book, a lot of public servants don't go into public service for accolades or attention. And she's a very modest person. Like, to me, she really represents the old Montana, quiet, just does her job. When I showed up, I was going to spend a few days following her around, and she had scheduled me to talk to every person she works with, because she wanted to make sure I knew that she was part of a team, and she wanted to celebrate, the people she works with and the work they do. And a lot of if you go to the National Archives website, a lot of her programs are front and center, and the records that are digitized were digitized under her command. But she does not like to brag, and I mean, I really respect. I think modesty is a wonderful virtue, and sometimes it was really hard getting the story out of her. She would tell me about some program we implemented, and I would just have to point blank say, was that your idea? And then she would say, yes, it was. So I think that modesty is one reason we're, of all of these workers, like Casey Sepp in the book talks about the guy at the who runs the the national cemeteries, and he was the same way. And they just want to, and Dave Eggers mentions that about the people at the Jet Propulsion Lab he talks to. They just want to do their job, and they just quietly go about their work and go home. And, which is a wild contrast to, the most vocal people we see representing the government, especially the legislative branch or the.
Well, but also it's not very Muskian, is it? They don't wield chainsaws in public in dark glasses. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Sorry, there we dropped out there for a minute. Go ahead.
No, I was saying that it's very un-Muskian. These people don't dress up in baseball caps and dark glasses and wield chainsaws.
Yeah, I mean, she's probably one of the only people we read about who's probably used a chainsaw on her childhood ranch, but to cut firewood, I'm guessing. But she, her modesty, like that seemed to be the norm with a lot of these people that you meet who are public servants. And I guess to their detriment. I mean, maybe one of the reasons we're in this pickle where, the federal workforce is under attack is they all could have maybe done a better job of telling the public what they do,
Yeah, it's interesting for people who are just listening.
The press space to tell those stories too, I think.
Sarah, you're sitting in I don't know if it's your kitchen or your living room, and there's a big photo behind you of Abraham Lincoln. Mm-hmm. Is there something of that sort of low-key Lincoln in the government workers who you covered and who some of the other contributors in Lewis's book covered?
I mean, I think so. I mean, one of the things I did with Pamela Wright at the National Archives is we went and looked at a bunch of landmark documents that are in the archives. Things she's been in charge of digitizing, she calls them hotshot records. Things like the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, one of the documents we looked at was the Homestead Act with Lincoln's signature on it. She is the granddaughter of a homesteader in Montana. I mean, I didn't write about this, but another one of the Lincoln documents we looked at was the Land Grant Colleges Act, which is, I attended a land grant college. It was really the first time in the history of the world that a government decided the children of the working class, riffraff like me, that we deserved higher education. So there's something, that aspect of the Lincoln Democratic spirit, I think she definitely embodies that. And I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to someone, I also wanted to talk to someone from west of the Mississippi. I just think we need to tell our own stories because, most of the media is on the East Coast and they just tell our stories when, I live in Montana. They just talk about us when our governor kills the wrong animal or something, And where was I going with that? I don't remember. It was the fact that, she came up in the University of Montana, and I mean, one of the other documents we looked at was the Higher Education Act of 1965. And there was this program, I was part of it too. It's called the Federal Work Study Program, where needy students are given jobs, partly to help fund their education, but also to get work experience. And she got hers through the work study program at the University of Montana, at the archives of the Mansfield Library, and working on their archival oral history project they were doing. And that's how she got her start to work in archives. And her first job out of college was working as a researcher for a Montana research organization, like looking up tribal water rights and stuff in federal archives. And she talked about how intimidating they can be if you're not an Easterner, if you're not an urbanite, like going to these big federal edifices where there are rules and guards, and how, like, one thing she loved about digitizing records is, you can bypass all that. You can be, a person sitting in their kitchen in Poplar, Montana, and, find your Air Force discharge papers or whatever. You don't have to go deal with the intimidating edifice of the state. And so there were just things about her as a person and her democratic spirit that I think I found really inspiring and stirring. And I also identified with that myself,
I know you gave an interview with Michael Lewis, and you said that all Americans can find their story in the National Archive. Tell me about some of the other stories that you think all Americans, and many Americans, won't even be familiar. I mean, how do you access the National Archive?
You just go on NARA.gov, NARA.gov, and there are, various portals within that website to access the digitized records. One of the great programs that Pamela Wright invented is called History Hub, and it's just a pure public service where anyone, anywhere, can type in a question about American history, and archivists, other federal employees, and a huge volunteer workforce will try and answer your question, or at least tell you where to look for more answers. One of the things the archives does is they manage all the federal census records, which can be made public after 72 years. So she was involved with putting up the 1950 census, the second it went live. And I mean, the census has such a dry but very basic American origin. John Lanchester actually talks about this a little bit in his piece about how it's baked into the founding of the United States. It's in the Constitution enumeration that we have to count our citizens in order to apportion the House of Representatives. That sounds pretty dry, but
and Lancaster, of course, is based in London, so I think he was the only contributor to the volume who's not American.
Yeah. Well, I think Geraldine Brooks might be Australian. But anyway, the census, it seems like such a dry thing. It's actually incredibly sentimental and moving and personal. And I mean, I found one major answer to a question I didn't know I had about why was my mother's family so screwed up? And looking at the census,
how's your family? Why is your mother's family so? I mean, how do they manifest?
They're extremely. I mean, for one thing, they were just extremely poor. So that's that doesn't set up any family for success, really. And I mean, that's one reason I'm so bully on the Higher Education Act of 1965. I'm like the generation before mine. My mother's older brothers, they had to quit school in third grade to work the farm. And then my generation, because we had access to Pell Grants and loans and the work study program, our generation is, a journalist, a bank vice president, a librarian, a high school basketball coach. So we really needed the federal government to lift our family out of poverty. But before that, just looking at the census records from 1940, I found that my mother's father worked on a WPA road crew, the Works Progress Administration, and I didn't know that man ever had a job. He was a mean drunk, and I didn't know he ever had a job. And when I asked my mother about that, she said he broke his back working on that road crew, and that sort of set in motion the rest of his life, which was just miserable, and shared with the entire family.
So
And
this really, when you talk about every American finding their story, you found your story, Sarah. So all Americans can, if
oh yeah,
so it's pretty easy to negotiate. Is it rather like using Google?
it can be. I mean, it sort of depends. The one thing about the census records is it's only recently that people could answer questions about themselves, including how to spell their names. Like, so many of them, you kind of have to dig around, because a lot of times somebody's name is misspelled, or you can't even read the handwriting. The digitization process is ongoing. I mean, not just that, like when Pam Wright and I were looking at documents, and like one of her projects I wanted to talk about was she got all of the ratified Indian treaties digitized, and on a proper website where it's just so easy to find all these treaties and look them up. And Trevor Plant, who's the guy at the archives in charge of the vault, who's in charge of all the national treasures, he just whipped out one of these treaties, and it happened to be the Treaty of New Echota, which I don't want to get into it, but it was basically the treaty that gave the government legal cover for sending the Cherokee Nation onto the Trail of Tears. And both of my parents are Cherokee, and so am I. And this document that he just, is like, look at this. I mean, it's why I exist. It's why my whole family exists. It's also a death warrant. I mean, a quarter of the tribe died walking from the east to what's now Oklahoma. And I mean,
is that the Trail of Tears, or is that
yes.
another?
Yeah. So I had read it. I had even read it in the town in Georgia where it was signed, the text, but seeing the document was.
So it's a very unvarnished version of America. I assume the same is true of the other great crime in American history, alongside the destruction of the native communities, slavery. How much did you look at that?
I mean, it's one of the great things about the National Archives is just how complicated the story is. I mean, when Trevor Plant showed me the Treaty of New Echota, I burst into tears, partly because, it was a death warrant, but I also cried because I recognized one of the signatures on the treaty, and it was my great-great-grandfather's, his commanding officer in the Confederate Army, because the Cherokee owned slaves and brought their slaves west on the Trail of Tears.
So it's complicated. So the Cherokee themselves owned slaves. So it's unvarnished. It tells the truth rather than the truth we want to hear.
Definitely. I mean, and it's not necessarily truth what you want to hear. I mean, one of the projects that Pam Wright oversaw was digitizing the records of the scouts who served out west in the United States Army after the Civil War. That includes the Indian scouts, on the screen right here. We're seeing.
Yeah, this is Harry Moccasin, the Crow Scout.
He was a Crow Scout, and he was a scout for Custer. And one of the projects was on the Buffalo Soldiers and their pension records. And, they are part of the Army after the Civil War in the West. Basically, I guess we talk about it today as settler colonialism, and they're part of that. The whole story is so much more murky and complicated and, difficult to discuss in a forum like this. I mean, one of the things I looked at was the Clean Air Act that Richard Nixon signed. I mean, the whole National Archives is full of all those Nixon tapes, and they're just so devastating to listen to if you're a human being, and they're him at his worst. And but the Clean Air Act has saved tens of thousands of lives. So what do you do with the idea that this terrible person did good things? You just have to square it in your head. And I think the way the National Archives presents all this information is completely nonpartisan, and it's just there. And I mean, I say in the piece, I think probably most people just find what they're looking for, and they can confirm their own, assumptions and prejudices. But if you really go looking in there with, just trying to, with an open mind, you just probably end up a state of just stammering like I am now,
Well, but that's what's so essential. How does it, Sarah? How does this sort of exist within the context of, I wouldn't say rival digital services. I mentioned Google earlier, but Wikipedia and now Silicon Valley's embrace of AI. Do you see it as a sort of as the foundation of something like Wikipedia? Is it an add-on? Are they developing new technologies like AI to develop the data within the National Archive?
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive at all. I mean, in fact, one of Pam Wright's programs was trying to get more National Archives records loaded into Wikipedia, to make Wikipedia to beef up their entries. And also, that was her way of sharing the records with people who would never go to a National Archives building, much less the website. I mean, one of the things about the National Archives is it's chronically, criminally underfunded, and digitization is a huge project and very expensive. And I mean, one of the ways she has paid for that is with corporate partnerships with places like Ancestry.com and Family Search. And they do foot the bill for a lot of this digitization. I mean, part of the reason all of those, and I think they used AI to get the census, the 1950 census up. There are also all these very promising projects they have with AI where, with their photographs, I think I don't know if they've started this or not, but they want to use AI to start all of the photographs that have been scanned and, have one name attached. AI can go through those and find somebody else. What if there's, I mean, this is my example, not theirs, but, what if there are a bunch of photographs and only Cesar Chavez is identified? AI could go in and say, there's Dolores Huerta too. But I mean, part of, getting in bed with Ancestry.com or Family Search, some people have a problem with that, but they just don't have the money to do what we need them to do. And so she was really resourceful in using what she had. And one of her big innovation was called the Citizen Archivist Program, where she used volunteers to come in and literally scan documents. Or there's a whole army of volunteers online. This can be done from anywhere, where they'll whatever records have been digitized, they'll tag them. So the example I use, there's this photograph of First Lady Betty Ford wearing a button for the Equal Rights Amendment. And the tags that the volunteers have added, and so it makes the archive more useful to the citizenry, because I think the tags, there's the ERA, of course, there's Betty Ford, there's also trimmed hedges, which is in the photograph, which sounds kind of random, but if you're looking into air quality in cities, trimmed hedges is actually a kind of hot topic. That Gerald Ford, his name is obviously in there. And so the volunteers add these tags. The National Archives doesn't have the money to do these projects
So in a sense, the volunteers are like the volunteers contributing to Wikipedia. It's almost become like an official wiki in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the volunteers are retired, of course, and I mean, people are living longer.
Are they anonymous? Do they contribute their name when they do these connections?
I think the names are, like if they're like the Indian Scouts. I think Harry Moccasin, the person who scanned those, I kind of think her name might be on there. On History Hub, the volunteers, they're listed by name when they answer. A few of the History Hub volunteers are basically, contributing as much as paid staffers. So yeah, they get their propers. Yeah.
You are doing exactly, I think, what Michael wanted to do with this book, which is convince us of the value, not in a utilitarian sense, but in a philosophical and aesthetic sense as an American, and describing an America that otherwise Americans wouldn't know about. In these dark times, at least for government, Sarah, of Musk and his chainsaw, is the National Archive particularly under threat? Has Musk cast his deadly gaze on the National Archive, or are they at the moment under the radar?
I don't know if that group of gentlemen has physically showed up there. I mean, the president did fire the archivist of the United States when he came in, which is his prerogative. The current acting archivist of the United States is, fun fact, Marco Rubio. I don't know how much time he's devoting to it.
Yeah, I think he's busy on other fronts. As Pamela, I hope and assume that Pamela Wright still has her job.
No, but she retired in December.
Okay, so she and who took over her job?
I think one of her deputies is doing that job, but the leadership of the National Archives, I think, under the archivist of the United States, who was the top deputies convinced to resign. So I think the person who's basically running it day to day is a guy who was working at the foundation that supports the Nixon Library. So the president does have a bit of a bone to pick with the National Archives. And I mean, he's a forgiving, generous person. I'm sure he will not, act with any form of vengeance upon them. But yeah, it's a concern.
We need unbiased government. I think one of the things, I mean, this project of Lewis was published in the Washington Post. Before the Washington Post itself seems to have been blown up by Jeff Bezos. Ruth Marcus, the very esteemed columnist, left at the beginning of the week because of Bezos's change in policy. What's your take on the current state? You're a career writer, Sarah, on the way in which people like Bezos buy and use publications for their own purposes, and why that's much less trustworthy than public ownership of the National Archive or other governmental institutions?
Well, I would say it's a mixed blessing. I mean, the assigning editor who shepherded this project that we did was David Shipley of the opinion page of the Post, who
got fired, basically.
He resigned, but
pushed out politely, I think.
I mean, the new policy of the opinion page at the Post is something about they're just writing about, what is it? Free markets and personal liberties. I mean, I guess that's the prerogative of the owner. So far, it doesn't seem to have affected the news coverage, but it's a concern. And David Shipley, I don't see that he had a choice. He had to. I don't.
Yeah, that's what I mean when he was fired. I mean, Bezos clearly wanted to get rid of him.
Just in terms of this project, I mean, I mentioned at the beginning of our interview, the brief I was given was go into the government, find somebody to write about. That was it. Like, that's actually how journalism is supposed to work. I mean, I can't know ahead of time whether what I'm going to report and find out about conforms to, some billionaire's idea of personal liberties or free markets or whatever. Like, I don't know. You just go look for a story and then write that story, or you have an opinion about something and you back it up with facts. Like, that's how finding the truth works. And I mean, having some kind of like shoehorning ideas and opinions into, one guy's new plan, that I just don't think that works from a practical point of view, to say nothing of the implications for,
Yeah, and I think this is such a wonderful project that Lewis and Shipley cooked up for the Post. You, Casey Chepp, Dave Eggers, John Lancaster, Geraldine Brooks, Kamau Bell, all important writers, all with a very interesting view. One wonders, you can never answer this, of course, whether in a post-Shipley Post, whether they would have run this series. Who knows? They claim they would have, but
I mean, I will say this, like, there's still a lot of stuff getting by Jeff Bezos, and has, since he's owned the paper, that, are at odds with his businesses. And one of the pieces in the book by Kamau Bell is about a woman, a young woman who works in the antitrust division of the Department of Justice. And I mean, obviously, they don't go into it too much in the piece, but that the antitrust cases looking into Amazon, they do bring that up, and Kamau does say, Jeff Bezos paid me to ask this question about whether he's being investigated for antitrust. I mean, what kind of?
I'll have to get Bell on the show. Actually, I want to get some of the other contributors. I'd like to get John Lancaster and Geraldine Brooks too. Finally, Sarah, we've been doing a lot of shows about the value of government. We did one yesterday with Mark Dunkelman. He has a new book out, Why Nothing Works, Who Killed Progress and How to Bring It Back. Basically, his thesis is we need more government. We also did a show with Max Steer, who I know is another friend of Michael Lewis, who runs the Partnership for Public Service. How essential is government, particularly in the context of Trump 2.0 and his and Elon Musk's determination, it would seem, to quite literally destroy much of it? I mean, what did you learn in broad terms? I mean, you're clearly someone not shy of opinions, but what did you learn from this project about the value of government?
I mean, that's such a large question. It's hard to answer, because government is, I live in a state, especially in Montana, where the government is such a huge part of our lives. Part of it is the federal government owns almost 30% of our land, for one thing. But just like when I was standing there with Pamela Wright and we were looking at the Higher Education Act of 1965, which was, an act of Congress signed by a president who himself, Lyndon Johnson, attended a public university and had real troubles putting himself through school. And standing there next to this, act of Congress, like with her, she wouldn't have been standing there without it. And one of the things that the government does that we take for granted is how many of the government programs, especially educational ones or grants to do scientific research, is about workforce. Like, at my local public university, it is a research university. A lot of those undergrads and grad students, besides advancing science, helping figure out like all kinds of things to make agriculture better able to feed a warming world, things like that. Besides the fact that they're trying to solve those problems, which is what government is supposed to do, while they're doing that, they are training the next generation of scientists, just as Pamela Wright herself was trained to be, the next generation of archivists when she was at the University of Montana. So another example in Montana here, like a huge I think more than 70,000 of our workforce is the outdoor recreation workforce. It's completely dependent on the United States Forest Service, the United States National Park Service, like thousands and thousands of jobs depend on the Forest Service clearing the trails, or the Park Service like keeping those roads open, or whatever. Like, everything is connected. It is a huge ecosystem of opportunity and service, and the public benefits in ways none of us will ever understand completely.
Everything is connected. I think that's a nice way of concluding. Sarah Vowell done a wonderful public service, so to speak, in your excellent essay in this new collection from Michael Lewis, a very timely collection, Who is Government? The Untold Story of Public Service. It's being told now by some of America's best writers, like Sarah Vowell. Thank you so much, Sarah, and I'd love to get you back on the show. There's so much more to talk about.
Thanks, Andrew.
As Trump 2.0 unfolds, this story is certainly not going away. So congratulations on the piece, and best of luck with the collection. It comes out next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.